Hey, good evening, everybody. It's BK Fulton, Chairman and CEO of Solidify Productions. And thank you for joining us tonight for Inspiring Minds. We have a wonderful show for you this evening. We're going to talk about this book. It was published on August 6, 2020. It chronicles a story of friendship. Tonight, we have the benefit of Miss Annie Toby, the editor of Boomer Magazine, who's going to do a moderated interview of Jonathan Blank, an attorney and longstanding community leader at McGuire Woods, and yours truly. Also tonight, we will be donating funds to social justice charities and charities that work in the COVID-19 area. So if you like what you hear or you feel so inclined, please hit the donate button. But without further ado, I'll ask the team to bring on Annie and Jonathan, and we will begin. Welcome to Inspiring Minds.
Just to reiterate, of course, this is the book that we are talking about and the issues involved in it. And I had a chance to read the book and do a write-up on boomermagazine.com and was so impressed by it, really appreciated the message. One thing that just a little bit of the story behind it. So Jonathan works at the same law firm as BK's wife, Jackie, and Jonathan had noticed an article in the Richmond Times-Dispatch where Jackie had, and nicely Jonathan reached out and said, "I'm proud to know you, thank you for doing that." Jackie responded, said, "Thank you very much. You might also be impressed by what my husband, BK Fulton, has done." And the two began communicating and sharing. She shared several things that BK had done out of, I'm sure, a plethora of things. But the one thing I really appreciated about the book for reviewing it and recommending it to people is how it's very compact. It's really very interesting in the way it's set up, but in its compactness, it covers so many of the basic issues that are important in today's communications between whites and people of color. And in part this is because it encapsulates the four primary things that the two men shared. One is BK's commencement address, which makes the case for how many people of color are overlooked for their achievements, just glossed over. She also shared BK's essay, The Divine Puzzle of Life, which was on baconsrebellion.com, and that shines a light on the pecking order of humanity, white frailty, and the need to search for truth and to question inequality. And Jonathan, just, I believe, within a week or so prior to the two of them connecting, had written a letter to the editor. And his letter to the editor was regarding his high school where he graduated, Douglas Freeman High School. As you can guess, he's a Richmonder. And he was saying that Confederate symbols need to go. So it covers a lot. It's very concise, and I think it's a great book for somebody who is looking, not ready to dig into a huge, thick book, a heavy book. It really covers a lot. So those are some of the things that I'd like to address today. And Jonathan, I would like to start with you because you did these things. You reached out to Jackie, said thanks. You began a dialogue with BK because you appreciated what he had to say, and you wrote the letter to the editor, which was controversial, is controversial among many whites in Richmond, that Confederate symbols should go. So what is it in your life that opened your mind to the realities of racial inequalities when so many whites are not open to that? And what makes you different from those other people that haven't come to see that?
I think the ignorance is the first part, and how I came to this, and I'll come back to being different. I had been around people of color throughout my life, and even being around people of color throughout my life, the weeks after George Floyd and even the days after George Floyd really were an awakening to me, where one of my classmates, and I write about this in the book, called me and said, "Have you looked at the yearbook, my high school yearbook?" And I hadn't in years. And there I was in a picture with a Confederate flag. And it shocked me. Someone who I believe I'm very aware and conscious of race issues for a variety of reasons growing up, having friends of color, being parts of political leadership of color, and being in tune with it. But yet there I was, it seems like a long time ago, but it wasn't. It was 1988, where I was sitting on a cover of a yearbook right in front of a Confederate flag. And so it really awakened to me that even as educated as I thought I was, as aware that I thought I was, that I wasn't. I needed to go back and start researching, start studying, start thinking a lot harder about subjects that I thought that I was okay with. And I started a dialogue both with my classmates. I started dialogue with partners. I started dialogues with friends of mine of color, mostly, some not of color, but mostly of color. And the feedback that I got was both caring, listening, but also, you need to start researching more. You need to start, you spend so much time researching so many other things, so interested in so many other things. You need to not just ask us, you need to start reading and start thinking really deeply and hard. And so that, over the course of a few weeks, in discussions with Susan and my wife, woke me up a little bit more that I don't know barely anything that I thought that I knew. And so that was one part. The answer back to what makes me different, I'm not sure if I'm different necessarily, except for I think that what the introspective thinking caused me to do, which I thought that I was doing all along, but I clearly wasn't doing it well enough, was trying to think about walking in the footsteps of people of color and what they would think when they would walk into a courtroom or step into a courthouse and see a Confederate flag or see a Confederate general. Driving down Monument Avenue, which for years I drove down, and we brought people when they came in from out of town to show them the statues. What would a person of color think about with regard to those things? And so, in terms of what's, I think, making me different may not be the right word, but making me thinking about it in a different way at this stage than some of the people that I think are denying the harsh realities of what those symbols stand for, is that I am trying to put myself in the footsteps of people that there's no way that I can, but at least I'm trying to. And I think that maybe that's the start of the answer.
Three traits that I see could be pulled out from here are: one, an openness to truth; 2, an openness to change, and 3, a willingness to be empathetic with people. So, turning to you, BK, from the beginning of this discussion, you could have responded to Jonathan, to his kudos for what you'd said, and just say thank you. But you really, the two of you really worked on connecting, not just to going beyond the superficial things. Why?
Well, I felt
I felt
flattered. Maybe can we use the others while we? Yeah. I felt a little flattered that he would take the time to listen to the speech and take the time to read the article. And so that motivated me to keep talking. And I'm a person who doesn't mind sharing my point of view, especially if someone's going to listen. My kids don't always listen. But it was this kindred feeling that was going back and forth. I mean, what Jonathan didn't say is that, I mean, some of those emails were 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. I mean, and so we were like, okay, wait a minute, there's something going on. We keep the same crazy hours, and so for me, I grew up in a household where my parents were educators, both mom and dad. My dad was a math teacher. My mom's an English teacher. I played a lot of sports and was always on integrated teams. And so was very comfortable with people from different communities, and it was a mixed bag. And felt that if people would listen, that there's not really a lot of difference between us. And if we listen to each other, there's this opportunity to deliver something even better to our children and their children. And, while I wasn't thinking about it at the time, this ability to speak truthfully and share information honestly really became the book. And it was so moving for me that we started carrying this, this symbol of our friendship, this T, at all times. And we both have them, made by a Lebanese man, made from the jawbone of a donkey to symbolize resilience and tenacity, strength, the ability to overcome beyond all obstacles. It has gold bands, one bronze, one rose gold, one white gold to symbolize the precious nature of humanity. And then this clear resin with smoke inside that has kind of the magic of the work we have to do together. And, but it symbolizes the stuff we don't know and the work we all have to do. And I think whatever your T is, it's an important thing to grab a hold of it. Jonathan's an avid golfer, so when he started saying, I'm going to carry a T, what that is giving a nod to Dr. George Grant, who is an African-American that invented the golf tee in 1899. He's also the first Black professor at Harvard, and he was a dentist. So multi-talented individual, but most golfers have no idea who this person is. So nobody listened to his story. And again, I was just flattered that somebody of Jonathan's character and standing in the community would want to hear some of this stuff, because that's part of the challenge, right? We get into our silos, we get into our tribe, we get into our group, and our affirmations become how many times they like what we do. And so we're counting likes instead of figuring out how to find people we can count on. And there's a difference. And it turns out that the people you can really count on are people like Jonathan, are people like myself, or people like you who do what they say. We show up when we say we're going to show up. And those characteristics are equally distributed throughout the human species. What you begin to discover as you look closer is that we've all been taught different things, but we've had this diet of that overplays contributions of white people, that underplays contributions of Black people. And so you don't get to know fully about me. I don't know fully about you. And it's not a formula for moving to the world that our children deserve. And when Jonathan was receptive, I felt like it's important enough to take the time to have a real conversation with this fellow human being.
So, building on what you had to say about the contributions of Blacks being underplayed, contributions of whites definitely being inflated and given plenty of PR. The flip side, not really the flip side, but the other side of that same issue is what I'm sure Jonathan experienced growing up, and what I did. I never knew about Tulsa being destroyed. I never knew the extent of redlining, nor did I know that it was our own government, local and federal, that was causing those problems. I never knew that Jackson Ward was destroyed destroyed in many ways, significant ways. There's so much I didn't know. I didn't know that blackface was bad until it started coming. There's so much I didn't know. So you've got two sides. You've got the fact that Blacks are being underplayed. You've got the fact that the issues are being covered over. And now you have a president who is trying to make that even worse. Because we can't go in and change the education system, what can we do?
Well, I think, let me jump in, and I'm glad you asked that. So right after the Civil War, we had the Reconstruction period, and 7 to 12 years, depending on how you count it. And coming out of that, you had Blacks actually voting and sending freedmen to Congress, Senate, elected office locally. You had the 3 Reconstruction amendments to come out of there, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendment. And public schools were expanded, public sewage was expanded. It was working. But it didn't fit the narrative of these people can't govern. These newly freed people would make a mockery of things. So literally, mobs would come in and at the end of Reconstruction would literally unseat government. Would unseat government. Remember, at this time in history, there were some states that were majority people of color. And so you had to take away their right to vote and take away the earned standing to take over. And so that's what happened. So in Tulsa, for example, Tulsa is considered the Black Wall Street. In the 1920s, early 1920s, they had this community with its own bus station. There's some that say they were like their own airline, or at least an airport, schools. And there was allegedly an offense against a woman in an elevator. An African-American bumped into her or may have said something, allegedly said something. And it set off this firestorm where literally 30 some odd blocks of the neighborhood, the Black part of town, was burned to the ground. And these were very successful people. What you find out later with scholars writing Carol Anderson in particular, who wrote the book White Rage, would say that the biggest trigger for white rage was Black achievement. And so there's something else going on. So then what happens? Fast forward to the 1950s, and you have a young man from the North visiting family in the South in Mississippi, and allegedly he whistles at a woman. And his name was Emmett Till. Now you find out later that he actually didn't do that, but he allegedly whistled at the woman. The woman's husband and another person go and get him from his family's house. They torture him. There's a trial. I mean, actually, tomorrow is the anniversary of that trial where those men were acquitted of that murder, and then went on to brag about it later because they couldn't be tried again because of double jeopardy. They were brought up on charges of kidnapping, which they weren't tried on prior to, but they were acquitted of that as well. But that set off another movement, the civil rights movement, where you had three big laws that come out of it: Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, and the Fair Housing Act. And recently, after the killing of George Floyd, you have another unrest, a civil unrest. Now the activities leading up to George Floyd, the other killings, it was a pressure cooker, and the George Floyd murder really blew the lid off of it. But we had the largest protests, largest civil unrest in the history of our country, over 20 million people. So it's another defining moment. And the question becomes, what do we do? What is our generation going to do? What are our policy changes going to be? Because it's one thing to pull down statues, but what are the statutes that are going to replace them and make our society more just and more equitable for everyone? I told some people earlier in the week that you don't have to worry about people running you down with white sheets if you have spreadsheets and you can gerrymander and take away people's right to vote and take away people's opportunity. That's why I went and voted today, the very first day I could vote, because it's that important. And people died for this right. It's always the same thing. It's always franchisement, voting, equal education, housing, reduction in mass incarceration, and jobs. It's always those five since the beginning of our country. And if we don't fix it, we doom future generations to have the same battle every 50 to 100 years. And I think something important will come out of this. The young people I saw out in the street were white, were Black, were Asian, were Jews, were Gentiles. They were old and young. And it was all over the world. It was a thing to behold. Coming out of the civil rights movement, I spent my first 10 years in civil rights. I was just amazed. And then that kept going, and in many respects it's still going. I said, this is more than a flash in the pan. And we've got the attention of the world. Now we have to do something significant that represents what's the lasting change that comes out of this. Otherwise, it could be all for naught.
So, BK, on another interview I heard you do recently, you said something, a wonderful way to encapsulate it, do something you love with someone you don't usually do it with. Now, two questions, and I'd love to have Jonathan's take on this as well. The first part is, do you feel like this applies to Blacks as well as whites? I've heard it as a white person, yes, I need to find a Black person and do something with them and learn and listen and so forth. But do you think it applies to Blacks as well? And then the second part of it, in our society, even here in Richmond, that though not officially, is still in many ways very segregated. How do we do that? Do you have suggestions for that?
I'm going to give a short answer so Jonathan can weigh in because I'm running my mouth too much. The short answer is yes. It applies to everybody. That's why it's race neutral. It is do something you love with someone you don't usually do it with. That's for everybody because we all can learn and we all have something to learn. And how do we do it? It's as simple as that. So if you like writing and you know someone else who likes writing, go write together or talk about topics or invite them to your book club. Share some of your writing. At the end of the day, you make friends with people. And what you find out when you make friends is just what the common things are. And I think it's humans that make this so complicated. When we were kids, it was pretty easy. Who was your neighbor? Who was around the corner? Who did you go to school with? Who treated you okay? It wasn't that complicated. And I worry that we've allowed getting to know each other to be too complicated. I worry, even though I was part of an industry that proliferated these devices, and my stock went up every time we sold a few million of them. But I think they've divided us. So you see the kids at the kitchen table doing this, or with their friends, and so we're alone together. And we've got to figure out how to be together and put down the technology and pick up the humanity.
Yeah, I'll weigh in. It can be simple. It can be more complex in doing what BK said, but it can be across the board. It can be in your religious setting, someone in your religious setting. It could be in your work. It could be at the grocery store. It could be in an airport. My kids and my friends joke all the time. There's not a person that I see that I'm not willing to go up and have a conversation with. And I do think that it's showing up in every parts of life, but more than just the superficial hi or introducing yourself. You're not going to do it with a stranger, but there are people within your workplace that you wouldn't normally think to do it. I'll give an example in a second. There are people in your religious institutions that you wouldn't normally do it, in your political committees or your book clubs, and inviting people in. It may feel uncomfortable. It may make you feel vulnerable, but do it and just start doing it. And I'm going to give two examples real quick. One of them is a person in my law firm I would consider friendly with and even consider a friend for years, who is African American, but we've never gone out and marketed towards a client together. And BK, after having conversations with him and this concept that he said, I just sent an e-invite to my partner who I've known this guy for 15 years. And I said, we're going to do, I like trying to trace down new work and new people and trying to help people. I want to help people with you. And his reception was incredible. It was incredibly warm. And go back to what you said, I give BK the credit in terms of reaching back out to me. And we'll talk a little bit about quality time remaining. But if you reach out to people, you're going to get it back tenfold over. And you're going to get these rich experiences. It may feel uncomfortable. It may feel a little strange, but even BK and I, again, we've only known each other for now 3 months. But he said, come into town, or I was coming into town. We were doing something, and immediately he said, break bread with me. Let's go around the corner. We were social distance. We had our masks on. We made sure we were apart. And again, do something that you love, again, with someone that you normally wouldn't do it with. Again, you would sound crazy because we're brothers and friends now. We've had this amazingly rich experience, but, we hadn't sat down and eaten together. And we did. And we got into some seriously complex, very interesting conversations in just an hour together. And I got so much more than just driving and being with him. I had such a rich experience. I drove back, had this conversation with Susan about all the things that we talked about. And then again, it sort of becomes, it builds on itself. The momentum, you have these conversations, you continue to have the conversations, and you bring more people into it. And back to the book, I really do believe these small acts have incredible ripple effects. They affect, people across the country. Even just having that conversation I shared with my friends that I'm talking to in San Francisco or Chicago or wherever. Just do it, people. That's what I'm telling you to do. Just get out of your comfort zone, get yourself vulnerable, make yourself uncomfortable, and you will be rewarded in 10 times, 100 times over.
Annie, can I jump in here? I have to share this. I mean, he's absolutely right. It's crazy how rewarding it is. So the subtitle of the book is Be Kind and Just Believe, BK and JB. So that happens to be the initials that are carved also on the T. So it's a little bit more of the symbolism. We were having a little fun when we did that. But, when you think about it, people, again, what's this? It feels so enormous, right? The way that the news hits you with issues of race and gender, equity, or you see the stuff burning, or you see the gunshot, and it feels heavy. But the work of getting to know someone in your office or spending some time with a colleague or your neighbor, it doesn't have to be that heavy. I mean, the Grand Canyon wasn't formed by some giant all of a sudden flood. It was a constant drip over time, a lot of time. So I hope it don't move that slow. But the point is, it's the consistency. It's doing it. And then you start having these rewards and you say, oh my God, I should have been doing this the whole time. And then people are like, wow, look at all the new stuff that's coming out of you. What's going on in your life? And it's like, carrying these burdens of my tribe or hate, or I don't like you because you look a certain way. That's heavy. That's a drain on people, a drain on humanity. And I think that not only is it these simple acts of kindness, they can make a huge impact, but also they can lighten our loads. And I think that is something that we shouldn't miss, that it feels good and it's part of the lift.
So, building on that again, one of my learning moments in listening to that was, I first think about if you're black, you need to spend time with a white friend or acquaintance. If you're white, you need to spend time with a black person. But I'm also thinking about it from my experience. Sometimes we as white people, I don't know if the word is still appropriate to use, woke, if we have learned that there are some issues, I think there are some white people that we need to be spending time with, that people who would otherwise make us uncomfortable. But I would like you all, you both to address this, whether you choose to address it specifically or more generally. I know that there are certain issues that come up on a regular basis if you're talking about racial issues with people, whether they share your beliefs or they're different. Going back to problems with NFL players kneeling, whites who deny that white privilege exists. Either they're in denial, they are struggling financially themselves, and they say, well, I don't have any privilege. Or they look at someone who is black and successful, and they say, well, look, no, they can do it, so there are no problems. They don't see that blacks are treated differently by police. They argue with the violent protests as opposed to just the peaceful ones. All of those things that come out, I don't know if you all have any suggestions for how those can be addressed, or if you have general ways that you have found it is good to deal with that kind of thing. Not deal with, that sounds too negative. um, to talk with people about those things.
Sure. Well, that's a fair question. I mean, at the end of the day, reading is critically important, and getting information is critically important. Now, I when I retired from running the phone company, I got into the media business, but I just had the notion to give you an interesting story. So let me show you how I introduced cognitive dissonance. So I was invited to a friend's birthday party, and then I'm going to give you some media industry statistics. I was invited to a friend's birthday party, my wife and I, and so we went there, and we happened to be the only Black people there, and people were coming over, being very nice and speaking to us. And so the one guy, he sat down and said, "Well, oh hi, I hear you're at the phone company. What do you do at the phone company?" I said, "Oh, I run the phone company." He was like, "Oh, okay. Well, what do you do?" "I run the phone company." And he was like, "Well, like this part, that part, I was like, "No, the whole thing." And then it was still hard for him to get past the stereotype, whatever he was expecting in his head. And then he finally said, interesting how he had identified that I actually run the phone company. I happened to have a very nice car at the time. I like fun cars. And he said, "Oh, that so-and-so car in the parking lot, that's your car." I was like, "Well, yeah, my wife and I, we have that car." And he was like, "Oh." And so it's almost like he had to look at our trappings because it seemed so unreal, because it didn't fit what he has in his mind. And so what people carry in their heads is very important. They act on that. And until you introduce different information, they will continue to act on that. If he'd have been talking to a white guy, "I run the phone company." "Oh, how long have you been doing that? How do you like doing it? What did you do before?" It's a different conversation. But so that's part of the dance that one may have to tolerate. If you're a woman and you say, "I'm the chief scientist," whatever, or "I'm the editor for a magazine." So like, you're whose assistant? Which secretary? And you get that sort of thing. No. But what the other thing that happens for people who don't even realize the privilege. So if you start seeing women gaining or minorities gaining, you see a couple of jobs, "Oh my God, Black people are getting everything. They're winning everything." So in the media business, you see a couple of big deals from Black people, and folk kind of get upset about that. We're post-racism. Obama's been elected, so everything's cool. But here's 2019 and 2020 statistics from the media industry from UCLA. These are not my numbers. CEOs and chairs, this is a Hollywood diversity report. CEOs and chairs, 91% white, 82% male. Senior executives, 93% white, 80% male. Unit heads, 86% white, 59% male. TV show creators, 91% white, 78% male. So when you look at TV and you wonder why you see what you see on TV, it's because the same set of guys with the similar worldview, similar gender, are calling the shots. I'm not saying it's horrible, but what I'm saying is when you're used to having all of the pie, sharing any of it all of a sudden seems problematic. Again, it's always the same issues: voting, housing, education, mass incarceration, jobs. It's always the same thing. And so, people are probably getting tired of hearing Black Lives Matter. Black people are tired of having to say it. People are tired of seeing the images of police putting upon Black people. I'm tired of seeing them, but I've got kids, and I realize this is part of something we have to fix in our society, but we're tired of experiencing it. And so something you said earlier in the conversation that's really important, one of the things we tried to introduce in one of our films, One Angry Black Man, is this idea of empathy. And it's putting yourself in the other person's shoes for a second, And empathy can be hard to teach because it requires you to step outside of the way you're seeing things. They're getting all the breaks. I'm not getting my shot. And to set that aside and look at it from his or her point of view. Why should she get less for the same work as someone that looks like you? Why should someone with more education than you who's brown get paid less than you? It just doesn't make any sense. You can't, it's hard to make rational arguments for that. So then you start filling it in with the stereotypes. They must be lazy. She must not work as hard. Maybe she went to a lesser school. And so to keep people from filling in their curiosities with nonsense, we have to read. We have to engage more. We have to interact more. And we've got to create a system that doesn't, by design, favor in one direction or another. We like to think we have a meritocracy, but what we really have is a system that, if you know the right person, you get the best opportunity. And it's less meritorious. I mean, there's a book, I forgot the analogy he used, but the professor said that we're racing towards a glass floor where the children of the rich and the connected, they only can fall but so far. They get the plum internships, they get the best opportunities, they get to run stuff, and they're woefully underprepared. And my hope is that because we're at a time, we're not in 1868, we're not in 1955, so we have this awakening this time, but I have rights too, and Nick has rights too, and you as a woman, you have rights. So now how do we rejigger and improve upon our system? The current president is using the dog whistle of racism and using kind of silo politics to play to a base that he thinks will put him in the White House again. I think what he underestimates, as did Andrew Johnson in the 1860s, as did other people in the 1960s when they thought Lyndon Johnson would never vote for the things he did. He was a Southern Dixiecrat. He still voted for the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, fair housing. He underestimates that the people of goodwill and the white people of goodwill, he underestimates them. You can look and see right and wrong. We know the difference. And people who want a better society for our children are going to vote. And they're going to vote their dreams and not their fears. Historically, when presidents have tried to divide our country, they always push the fears. And in 2016, 7 out of 10 white men went in that booth and picked Trump. 6 out of 10 white women went in that booth and picked Trump. So so now that we've seen what we get with a president like him, we'll see what happens. But they're going to push your fears. I know it's coming. A Willie Horton type commercial, something that says scary, scary, scary things are going to happen if the other side wins. And what's amazing is that in some states, the polls are pretty tight. In others, hopefully not so much. But my prayer is that real Americans come out. And I say real Americans in that people who realize that voting is a right and we're not trying to take it away from anybody. So vote what you think, your values. But I want people to believe in America. And if you believe in America, you want to hear the voices of other Americans. You respect other Americans. I see me in all of you. And if you win, I win too. And that's the America that I want to hand to my children's children.
Jonathan, do you have a response to that? As a lawyer, I would think that you would have some good insight into how to talk to people.
I'll try from a bunch of different angles, but I will start with that you have to start. You have to get engaged. You have to have the conversations, because if you don't, we are years away, if not generations away, from solving these issues. And every second that goes by that you don't start the conversation, you're another second from being more generations away from solving it. And so you have to start now. And it may be uncomfortable, back to the storyline. It may make yourself vulnerable. And you can't have an expectation that you're going to change the people that don't believe that there's white privilege. You can't have an expectation that they are going to have an epiphany during the conversation. That does not mean that you shouldn't have the conversation. You have to continue to have those conversations. And for one reason, you don't know who else is listening. And when I'm engaged in those conversations and the person on the other side is defending something that is, to me, indefensible, the people that are around that are listening, who may be on the fence, who have not heard, they may wake up. And it may not be that day. It may be a week down, it may be a month down, but it's going to happen if you continue to have the conversation. So I think showing up is super important to have the conversations. Making your expectations not in a 24-hour news cycle. We have this expectation that it has to be here and now, but we're in for the long haul. And you can't lose sight that the continuity of the conversation changes the battlefield and changes how people think. And if you think that it's going to happen immediately, you're going to be disappointed. If you think that you can have some impact over the course of time, start now. So I think that's important. The third thing is, back to the education piece, you have to educate yourself to disarm people with ignorance or untruths. Again, I implore the people that are listening to this to go listen to BK's address to VCU. And it did move me incredibly. And I was listening to it at 11 o'clock at night. And we are on the same time period in terms of staying awake. But to have the evidence handed to me that there were so many people of color who have not been recognized, who have not been rewarded for their contributions to society, to be able to bring those into the conversation. I'll come back to the T. Think about the T. I mean, it is arguably the most white privileged sport that's ever existed, golf. It's probably dominated by whites more than any other sport. And yet, if you ask any golfer, the single most important piece of equipment in a golf game, it's the tee. And if they knew that an African American invented this, it may change the dialogue that they have about golf and how they see golf and how people of color can be involved. And then the last, and someone just put it on there, they stole my thunder, Anne-Marie just posted up. You have got to speak the truth. You can't exaggerate. And some of my friends are laughing because they'll say that I as a lawyer, I will exaggerate a little bit to make a point. And yes, I do, but you have got to stick with the truth. And the truth is incredibly powerful. The truth will set you free. If you seek the truth, it will help people understand the travesties that have taken place, the work that needs to be done, and the positives that are out there. Again, we focus so much on the negatives with BK in this conversation, in his speech to VCU. Focus on the positives. You will connect so much with people if you focus on the positives. You will find the common ground. But back to what Anne-Marie said, you got to be truthful. If you start fudging or if you start going off path and you're not truthful, you're going to lose the credibility. You're not going to convince anybody, and you're going to take the step back instead of taking the step forward.
I'm sorry. I agree with that 100%. It's this idea of truth setting you free is part of what we mentioned in the book. It's just honest conversations can create new friendships. And related to that, it's not about blame. We're not trying to vilify a particular person or group. the objective here is to move forward, but we can't keep moving forward on lies. We can't, as a community tries to resurrect or reconstruct their identity, what happens too often is it bumps into the lie of an identity that another group is trying to preserve. And there's a clash there. And we've got to work that out. And interestingly, there are reasons why we are in the place that we're in. And we can explain it. Like you said, you didn't know about Tulsa or Jackson Ward. I mean, I could go on and on. A lot of people, we turn on the lights tonight, and Lewis Latimer, who worked with Thomas Edison to invent the light bulb, Latimer invented the filament, which provides the incandescence in the light bulb. His parents were from Virginia, and they were enslaved people that went north so that he could have a better life. So just to put a fine point on it, here's a child who wasn't supposed to learn to read, inventing the very thing that allows us all to read still. And so again, for me, that goes to the power of humanity. And so if we get smart enough to invest in everyone, every boy and every girl on the planet, then we accelerate the cures for Alzheimer's, the cures for ALS, the cures for cancer. Did you know there was a Black guy who did the very first open heart surgery? The very first one, a Black guy. Blood plasma, a Black guy. How did he die? He got in a car accident too close to a white hospital that wouldn't give him his own invention. Insanity. And so what we have to do is not repeat those kinds of things and invest in all of our children. It's really an investment in ourselves. Again, how do you get communities to see themselves in each other? In the book, in that speech that Jonathan's talking about, I feel like the real genius in the world is developing the ability to see the genius in others. And when you bring your best self and I bring my best self and Jonathan brings his and Nick brings his and our guest brings theirs, we give love a chance. And at the end of the day, that's all we need is a little bit more love.
So knowing that we're getting short on time, I'd like to close with a couple different things. So one is resources for people to learn more about the truth and the facts to share with other people, and anything else you would like to close with. But before I open it up to the two of you, I'd also like to say that 4 things that have really meant a lot to me that I have recommended to others who really are open-minded and want to learn more. One is the documentary 13th by Ava DuVernay about incarceration. The Code Switch podcast, learned so much from that. More recently, just came out within the past month or so, is the book Caste. Has been very eye-opening, CASTE. And I was looking for it on the bookshelf behind me, but not new. But Ben Campbell's book, Richmond's Hidden History, I don't know if you all have read that, but it's about how Richmond has not been kind to African American. He's an Episcopal priest, and he comes at it from very much the point of view of caring and empathy and looking for justice. So that's me, and whatever you all would like to close with in the last couple of minutes.
Jonathan, you want to go, then I'll share something?
Sure. I think history teaches us a lot of things. And I think going back to your own history and trying to connect with your own community and trying to research where you are from, and also the issues of race, as we're talking about race in your own community. And don't be shy about looking in your own backyard. I'm in Charlottesville now. have a courthouse across the streets and the monuments that were just taken down. Again, researching that history. Where did they come from? Why were they there? In terms of my Richmond roots, 5 miles away, a world apart, by the University of Virginia president, Jim Ryan, it talks about Douglas Freeman High School and where it came from, and TJ, and the differences in terms of education and the law behind it. So I recommend that book greatly. So to looking at your history and really trying to find a connection so that you can relate to the story, because I think relating to the story is key. And then again, finding people that you can talk to, whether you're comfortable with it or not, you really need to do so. And before I leave, and then I'll turn it over to BK, I just again want to thank BK for reaching out to me and for bringing me along on this journey. It has been an incredible journey in these last 3 months. I do have a new family member. He is my brother. He is a friend, and I'm learning so much from him on a daily basis. And so I wanted to conclude just by thanking him.
Don't make me cry. I appreciate it. Love you, JB, and I appreciate you as well. And it's been rewarding for me. Annie, thank you for spending this time with us. I'll share a few things. I like the books that you recommended. Of course, you want to read The Tale of the Tea. Anybody who doesn't have that yet, you can get it at your favorite online bookstore. If you're in Richmond, swing through and I'll be happy to sign it, and then we'll track JB down. Maybe you can get a dual signature one. But be that as it may, there's a wonderful book by Professor Eddie Glaude Jr. called Begin Again. It's an analysis, contemporary analysis of the writings of James Baldwin. And I really find that interesting and thought-provoking and on point. There's a documentary called The Uncomfortable Truth. And that book, that documentary is done by Loki Mulholland, and he's a white guy, and he talks about his search for understanding and how he goes back and finds that his ancestors were part of setting up all the systems that we're trying to dismantle. And interestingly, his mom is one of the early freedom riders, and has one of the famous sit-in pictures, this white woman. And so it's an interesting family dynamic. I think finally, and what we've kind of mentioned throughout this segment, do something you love with someone you don't usually do it with. It doesn't have to get really heavy. You don't have to wait until after you've read through a bunch of writings. You can start tonight. You can call that person from college that you hadn't talked to in a while, or, on Monday, go have lunch with the colleague that you've passed by and you've been friendly with, but you might not have had a chance to break bread with them yet. I know it's a pandemic, and so we're all kind of batting down the hatches and trying to protect, but don't forget to open up a little bit. There's a lot of blessings when you open up. And with that, again, thank you everybody for coming out. This has been fun, and I hope we've been able to share something useful.